Hey there everyone, my name is AJ, you are listening to the Mighty Gluestick channel, your source for Dungeons & Dragons lore from the entire history of the game, focused mainly on the fantastic creatures that populate the worlds of the D&D multiverse. Today I'm bringing you something a little different, combining a creature that has been around for a long time in D&D and is a favourite of people who love the lore. Those of you who are fans of the Dungeon Dad's YouTube channel will know that he recently made a video on these beings, a very good one, I might add. And if you like my content, you will enjoy his, I'm pretty sure, so go check him out. However, I was inspired to make this video about them while I was reading about the nation of Cormyr in the heart of the continent of Faerun in the world of Abertoril, in particular the Farsea swamps, because Cormyr is where my home campaign is going to be kicking off in the next few months, depending on when the current campaign concludes. The Farsea swamp. This slowly growing mire consists of two separate marshes, the Farsea and the Tun, the ruins of a vanished civilization, not Netherese or, as many speculate, rise here and there amid this sodden and thoroughly unpleasant area. Thick with poisonous insects and plagues, Farsea prevents all but a few from glimpsing these ruins. Surviving witnesses describe ornate buildings made of glass as strong as steel that hint at a magical technology lost to the present day. Rumours also have it that the bold who can pry gold and strange secrets from the half-drowned basements, if they brave the swamp's pestilence and withstand the might of strange creatures set as guardians within the interior of these extremely tough glass-like towers. In the southern swamp, bands of human raiders not tainted with sickness have created a ragtag empire of bandits that survives by preying on the Cormyrian trade. These glass structures should be considered ruins, since they are fantastically old, and I would hazard a guess that being constructed at the end time of the creator races, after the Empire of the Dragons and before the Fey Lords brought the first elves to Toril. So we're talking many tens of thousands of years old, or at least over 30,000 years old. What race created these incredible structures? What's inside them? None who have ever set out to learn the secrets of these questions have ever returned. Perhaps those that did get inside and out again were simply lost to the gods' forsaken swamp and its myriad diseases. Perchance one of these fallen tragic heroes was taken by some swamp denizen, slain, eaten, and their skull kept as a trophy, and one fateful day this grim trinket found its way to a young wizard who was learning the spell Speak with the Dead. That would certainly be one way to introduce them into your campaign. But what are these creatures I'm talking about? Today, we're talking about the Spellweavers, a race so ancient that their civilization was in ruins by the time the first creator races spread out across the world of Toril. In fact, you can see reflections of their architecture in the very first structures ever built by other intelligent species on the world of Toril. The Spellweaver was created by Ed O'Connell, who published in Dragon Magazine number 163 in 1990. They have appeared again in Dragon 338 in 2005, also in Dungeon Magazine 104, 109, and 130. They have an entry in the Monster Manual 2 in 2002 and Monster Manual 3 in 2010. So a very successful monster franchise, you could say. So, are you ready to learn about these creatures? Because if you're a fan of very complex, cosmic, epic adventures, then Spellweavers are exactly what you've been looking for. I should mention here that if all this, even a little bit of this information, was being investigated by mortals in the D&D realms, Vecna would take a keen interest and possibly take direct action to suppress this behaviour, cleansing any record of this knowledge and imparting his special gift, turning anyone who was involved into a Nothic. But, for the moment, let us continue. Physically, Spellweavers are very pale, biped humanoids with 6 arms, a genderless body, and very flexible long neck and large black eyes, like that of an insect. On an otherwise almost featureless head, they tend to wear loose and functional robes of exceptional manufacture. They are 5 feet tall and weigh 100 pounds. Their skin sometimes has very subtle splotches or ripples of yellow, pink, or beige. They are otherwise very smooth, completely hairless and uniform in appearance. So they've kind of got mammalian, reptile and insect-like features. So it makes them, they're uniform, so it makes them very hard to tell apart, aside from their individual clothing styles. They have a unique life cycle. They live for 600 years and then drain all power out of a huge collection of all sorts of magical items, channeling this potent magical energy into the form of a coffin cylinder. And they seal themselves inside, going into a form of suspended animation. sometimes for as short as a month, but this process can last for hundreds of years. During this time, their body is completely rejuvenated. The skin goes from a slightly darker to a more light and youthful appearance, and they step out ready for another 600 years of life. You can also often find them out in the wilderness, just in random locations that are magical, meditating, and they can sit like that for months at a time, and if you disturb them, they pretty much fly into a rage. They can regenerate like this a total of 6 times, for a total lifespan of 4,200 years, including the 600 years they live before their first regeneration. At the end of this, I suppose, or at any point in their lifespan, they undergo a final transformation, and this is how they reproduce. An individual performs a special ritual in which they produce 6 of the chromatic discs that they create. More on those in a moment. They place these discs in six receptacles, and over the next few hours, new individuals grow from these discs, infused with all the knowledge and mental abilities of their parent, who, as they grow, withers away and turns to dust. So that's the end of that Spellweaver's particular lifespan. Spellweavers are, understandably, fairly obsessed with the number 6, and it underpins a lot of their designs and philosophies. To them, 6 is the perfect number. It represents beauty, symmetry, order, and identity. You can find hexagonal forms and the classic honeycomb structure all through their architecture. The hieroglyphic writing they create, the patterns on their robes, and in the design of the equipment they create, even the magical shield spells they throw up manifest this hexagonal grid of energy. I mean, they're not far wrong. Hexagonal structures pervade the universe. Diamonds, ice crystals, beehives, RPG maps, D12s, the things are everywhere. Although they are perfectly capable of speaking, and with a somewhat high and reedy voice, they never willingly speak, relying completely on extremely powerful telepathy that they have honed over the millennia, choosing to forego speech as a primitive practice in favour of mental mastery. That being said, if your players know all about Spellweavers, and they come across a Spellweaver who loves the ancient art of karaoke, or better yet, have a spell puzzle, a Spellweaver lair, and a puzzle feature that requires a character to speak a word in Primordial, that's perfectly fine to throw your player characters a loop, particularly when they're in a metagame frame of mind. The original Spellweaver language consisted mostly of clicks and whistles, so perhaps there is some remote chance that characters might come across an incredibly ancient recording of one of them talking. Who knows? Spellweaver telepathy has a range of 10 miles. They can communicate extremely complex messages, concepts, and meanings to each other using the sign language involving their 6 hands, body posture, and the orientation and hues of their chromatic disc. A language is impossible for any other race to understand, short of using some sort of magic. Those who do try to communicate with them telepathically will have their brain assaulted with a massive stream of information. They must make a wisdom saving throw or face temporary insanity, a near catatonic state where the brain laboriously tries to process a huge amount of information. Essentially, they overclock the brain, and the result is a massive amount of lag. Those with advanced psychic abilities can communicate with them telepathically to a limited extent, but the process is very taxing. Typically, when weavers wish to communicate with other races, they have a rather cryptic written messages, which they will consider to be simple pictograms that baby should be able to understand, but are actually quite complex hieroglyphs. They may use very simple hand symbols to talk to humanoids they know well, but for the most part, they simply use magic to communicate, the same way they use magic for pretty much everything else that they do. Weavers are magic users on a whole other level from anyone else. They are innate sorcerers with the incredible ability to cast multiple spells at the same time. They can use 6 hands and multi-segmented brains to cast one 6th level spell or cast 6 first level spells simultaneously, or any combination, without any need of the spoken word or any somatic components, any physical components. They're just gestures and mental ability. This allows them to combine their spells, so they can cast 6 first level spells or any combination such as 3 second level, 4 of 2, 1/4 and 2 first level, so on. So 1 spell level per hand essentially, and they can combine any combination of them. This allows them to combine spell effects in so many ways, and of course takes them out of the league of most other spellcasters. Should they square off in a mage battle, no magic user can contend with the speed that weavers can unleash wicked combinations like that. They can cast a lot of spells per day. If you take their hit points, each hit point equals 1 level of spell. So they can cast a 6 level spell, that counts as 6 hit points. A Spellweaver can, with 43 hit points, can cast 43 level 1 spells per day. More so when they're using their chromatic disc. Physically, however, they're relatively puny. They Although they're immune to the effects of pain, psychic attack, and can be they can't be teleported or plane shifted against their will, they can in turn invisible at will, and they're not very adept at melee combat. They do often carry a staff or a magical blade of some kind, either a dagger, short sword, long sword, or a bastard sword. They don't tend to use ranged weapons, and they never wear armor, instead relying completely on magic for ranged attacks and personal defense. Originally, Spellweavers had a mighty civilization that spanned the multiverse. They were mostly non-aggressive vegan philosophers and explorers, establishing centers of activity called nodes across countless worlds. They also encountered a mirror universe where they came across a species called a Nera, which I'll do another video on later. These nodes were portal complexes housed within massive glass and metal pyramids. It's stone pyramids, but they're glass-like stone, powered by arcane forges that were fueled by magical items and the souls of living beings. So while they don't really mean the lesser races they encountered any harm, they still used a certain number of them as little more than firewood for their magical engines. And these nodes were scattered across countless worlds across the multiverse, usually only one or a couple per world. Spellweavers are strict atheists who believe the gods are not truly divine and actively shun their worship. They have no priests or clerics. The gods, of course, really dislike the Spellweavers, particularly for what they tried and are still trying to do. More on that in a moment. Because they share the memories of their ancestors, weavers do spend time devoted to contemplation and recollection, and to an outside observer, the reverence they display while doing this is almost indistinguishable from a form of ancestor worship. Also, asking a Spellweaver any question about the ancient past may get a mixed reaction, as they do not consider history to be a dry collection of facts, but a time that is still remembered. Also, if they're not descended from a weaver who was at that place when that thing took place, they might not answer the question unless they can talk to a weaver who is descended from one who was actually there at the time. Otherwise, who can trust the records written down by someone? They could be complete lies. So they may not render an answer at all. They'll just say, who knows? I wasn't there. Or we weren't there. The chromatic discs that the weavers use, as well as a form of communication and reproduction and a tool to activate equipment, open doors and so on, are also living extensions of themselves that enhance their arcane powers, allowing them to cast more spells per day. If anyone tries to use one, the disc will explode in a sphere of force 30 feet in diameter that damages everything it hits. Plus, there will be a shockwave and sound and debris that's thrown out a bit further, though not overly dangerous. Weavers can recreate a chromatic disc by exuding some of their own metallic blue blood that's similar to mercury and other body fluids, shaping it mentally and empowering the disc with arcane power. This only takes an hour, but it's an exhausting process that will tire out the weaver until they can rest. Remember, doing this 6 times in a row simultaneously to reproduce actually kills them and causes them to turn to dust. While they don't sound that terrible thus far, there are several reasons why weavers are a dire threat and arguably one of the most dangerous races in the entire multiverse. First, they ignore most other races because they don't consider them to be a threat, merely a resource that can be used. They have a neutral attitude and will not go out of their way to help any other being unless doing so also serves their own needs. They will capture and sacrifice other beings to fuel their arcane technology and feel zero remorse for having done so because that's of how they view the universe, which will be clear in a second. If a species or group is considered a threat by them, the Spellweavers will usually present them with a gift, either directly or just leave it somewhere that others can easily find it. This gift will be a powerful magical artifact. A great example is the Deck of Many Things, or a Ring of Wishes, or a Sphere of Annihilation, or a crown that conveys the power to dominate others, and so on. All they need to do is sit back and wait for the inevitable chaos and destruction that is then brought on a civilization by itself, as such a powerful item sows greed, corruption, and inevitable slaughter. They've done this time and again, and they see that it works 100% of the time. And knowing the human race as we do, how can we argue? Because of their regenerative and reproductive process, their technology and means of transport, and their long-term goals all hinge on magical power, they constantly seek to acquire magical items and artifacts. The majority of their activities dealing with other races is all focused on this constant need for more and more magic. If they cannot get what they need through reasonable dialogue and trade, they will attempt to gain it through stealth and theft, and if they face any opposition, they respond with lethal force if need be. Talking of stealth and how they tend to avoid being pestered by the gods, once per day a spellweaver, any spellweaver, can create a 200-foot radius zone that blocks any scrying and planar travel. Anything. It lasts for 10 minutes. It only takes a round for them to do this and costs them no energy. They also tend to create this sort of effect and craft it into structures they build, shielding them from any unwanted attention. As masters of planar travel, they consider it a basic defense measure. Other races would kill for this sort of knowledge. Now for the bit that Vecna really wants nobody else to know. Spellweavers spanned the multiverse. They know more about its structure than any other mortal race and have studied every form of language they encountered. One of the reasons they stopped using their own is to avoid any bias in their investigations. They discovered the supernal and primordial tongues and pieced together a language of creation, basically the words that beings like gods use to reorder reality itself. And they were determined to be the first mortal race to speak this language and thus ascend to the level of divinity. Before they got to that point, though, they knew enough to be able to, as they saw it, fix the multiverse, reordering the planes back into the correct positions and creating one undivided and perfect state of unity. As far as many of them were concerned, the gods actually chopped up and reordered a perfect universe in order to create the cosmic wheel that we're familiar with. Where they could then complete their ascension in this perfect prime universe and take over reality, expelling those beings who called themselves gods and the ultimate source of this problem, the overgod Ao. As a wise precaution, however, they first created a series of gems that were inscribed with a ritual which would restore the universe back to how it was before they made this alteration attempt, just in case things went badly. This was called the Code of Reversion. When they performed the ritual, however, something very bad happened, and an event called the Disjunction took place, what caused it, nobody knows. It may have been the gods who threw a cosmic spanner in the works, might have been a self-defense mechanism of the newly formed abyss. This was a very, very long time ago, after all. In a moment, a massive chain reaction occurred, and each node exploded, one after another, across countless worlds, destroying every spellweaver involved in the ritual, any also who were inside any of these pyramid nodes, and in a moment their entire civilization was in absolute ruins. What is worse is that the gems with the Code of Reversion were scattered across the cosmos randomly. No spellweaver has ever been able to piece them all together and basically enchant the Code of Reversion. But, my friends, if they ever do manage to do that, they will reset the entire multiverse back to the moment before they attempted the ritual. And every race that evolved after them, every being, every event that came after will be instantly destroyed, rewritten out of a future that no longer happened. The gods who came after this moment, including Vecna, will be gone, erased, and the Spellweavers will instead concentrate on their ascension first, rather than restructuring the planes into the one prime universe. So, as far as the Spellweavers are concerned, the entirety of reality is the result of a mistake they made, and they are just seeking to correct it and try again. Thus, no other race really matter, because when they fix things, those races will never have existed. Thus, no lives really matter. Nothing that has occurred since the disjunction actually means anything. And so, Spellweavers feel completely justified in resorting to any action or deed that will progress them towards finding the Code of Reversion and resetting reality to how it should have been. You could say this makes them the consummate anti-villains. They don't derive any pleasure out of the suffering of other beings. They're just doing what they consider to be the logical course of action to correct a terrible mistake. Spellweavers make their lairs in a bewildering variety of locations, including underground or outdoors within giant mutated trees, on magical floating platforms disguised as clouds, within giant bubbles deep in the ocean, inside extra-dimensional chambers, within magical artifacts such as indestructible gems, and so on. You can see a lot of these structure styles mimicked by other races that have come hence and discovered these ruins and the means of their manufacture. Any Spellweaver lairs contain a number of 10-foot pillars made of stone or wood, and these columns are covered with magical hieroglyphs that are indecipherable. Sometimes the Spellweavers will rest stolen magic items on top of these pillars. Those who attempt to study the symbols must make a wisdom saving throw and end up confused for quite a while. Those who just glance at them will have a bit of a stumble, might forget their own name for a couple of minutes. Otherwise, they're just plain uncomfortable to be around and cause a headache. Touching the symbols on the columns can set off unpredictable magical effects, basically the same as the wild magic table for sorcerers. One item of note is the silver hexameric folio, which is 3 separate pentagonal books made of silver and covered in Spellweaver hieroglyphics. A metallic cord connects them. It's sentient and will be non-aggressive, acting as a patient teacher with the adventurers being its students. It will offer to teach spellcasters in the party new spells and actually do so. Also, it will offer advice on to how to navigate better, improving any skill checks to travel across the wilderness. And most importantly, it can provide more accurate coordinates for teleportation, eliminating any chance of error. If a character can figure out the secret of the folio, rearranging the pages to correctly line up to reveal more and more pages only decipherable when the correct sequence of angles is used, one after the other, and I should mention, it really helps to have 6 hands to be able to do this, a character can learn new spells created by the Hex Weavers. These spells are Anamensis, which allows the character to tap into the collective memory of the Spellweavers and gain bonuses to their knowledge checks. It lasts an hour per level, and during this time, the character can hear hums and clicks as if some weird thing is trying to contact them. It's kind of cool. Cynosure. Cynosure is a spell that makes plane shift and teleportation spells more accurate. No longer requiring the hexamatic, the character can now teleport with perfect accuracy, so no chance of error. Modulate is a very powerful spell that can be used to change the spell within a wand, infusing a new spell into it and using up those charges instead. So they can then, say you had a wand of sleep, you could then change the spell to being a wand of fireball and cast those instead for a minute, and then it reverts back to normal. But it's an incredibly potent sort of spell. Siphon allows the character to drain charges from magical items to allow themselves to regenerate an expended spell slot, so they can directly use magical items to fuel their own magical power, which is also pretty powerful. Spellstar creates a hovering star that the caster then casts a spell into, and if anyone casts one of those spells at them, the Spellstar automatically counters it. So that's also pretty wicked. And you can imagine that would make them pretty potent if they're casting spells in there which fend off magic missiles and things like that are common in a spell duel between 2 magic users. The Spellweavers have been around for a very, very long time. They have researched and created all manner of incredible and weird things, so feel absolutely free to go nuts and get highly wacky and creative with their contents. The confines and features of their lairs, including ancient ruins the weavers may have left behind, and who knows how many weird and creepy things are left behind, now used by other races, or built into powerful artifacts, or resting within mouldering containers but perfectly preserved, waiting to be unleashed once more. Spellweavers are the perfect choice for an ancient race of enigmatic arcane masters, the secret within a secret, and any scholar or sage of the D&D world who holds even a slice of information about them is most likely to guard it jealously and become obsessed with uncovering more about them. Those who delve too deep into the Spellweaver lore best beware, however, for Vecna is watching, and more than a few accomplished investigators have ended their days as gibbering Nothic horrors. Thanks for listening, everybody. I'll be back again soon.